Imagine waking up to a world locked in ice. The wind screams outside your cave, sharp enough to cut the skin. Snow drifts pile higher than houses. The air is so cold it burns your lungs with every breath. For most creatures on Earth, this is the end. But for a small group of humans, it's just another morning. Inside the cave, a fire glows softly. Children laugh as their grandmother shapes tiny shadows on the wall. Hunters sharpen stone blades, preparing for the day ahead. A woman threads sinew through fur, sewing a coat that will keep her child alive through the night. The smell of roasting mammoth fat fills the air. This isn't desperation. This is survival perfected. Because 25,000 years ago, during the last ice age, our ancestors didn't just endure the cold, they conquered it. They built warm homes from mammoth bones, stitched waterproof clothes finer than a modern tailor's work, and hunted creatures twice their size with weapons designed like works of art. The world around them was brutal, alien, and ever-changing. Entire species vanished. Ice swallowed lands. Oceans fell away to reveal lost continents. But humanity thrived, not through strength, but through creativity, cooperation, and innovation. This is the real story of how our ancestors faced Earth's harshest winter and survived. The wind was alive. It screamed across the frozen land, carrying tiny blades of ice that stung the skin like fire. Outside, the world was buried under white silence. Snowdrifts rose higher than trees, and the air burned the lungs with every breath. For most creatures, this was the end. For a small band of humans, it was simply another morning. Inside the cave, a soft fire glowed. Its warmth was fragile but precious, pushing back the cold one heartbeat at a time. Shadows from the flames danced gently on the rough stone walls, where black soot marked the memory of fires lit long before. A little girl sat near the warmth, her eyes wide as her grandmother shaped her hands into animal shadows. A deer's antlers, a bird in flight, a wolf's open jaws. The girl giggled, her laughter soft as falling snow. Beside them, a hunter crouched with a piece of flint in his hands. He turned it slowly, studying the stone as if it held a secret only he could see. With steady hands, he chipped away at it, shaping an edge sharp enough to cut hide and bone. Tomorrow, this blade might feed his family. Across the fire, a young woman bent over a piece of fur. Between her fingers, a bone needle carried a thread of sinew so fine it was almost invisible. She stitched the seams tightly, every pull measured, every motion deliberate. This coat would keep her child alive through the winter nights, when the cold could steal breath in minutes. Around her, other women worked the hides, shaping boots, cloaks, and mittens. Each stitch was survival. The air smelled of smoke and roasting fat. Outside, a mammoth lay cooling in the snow, its great body silent now, its hunt a victory carved from danger. A chunk of meat sizzled above the fire, dripping juices onto hot stones with a faint hiss. Hunger was always close here, but tonight there would be food. This wasn't a scene of despair. It was a picture of life carefully balanced on the edge of a knife. Step outside the cave, and the scale of the world steals the breath from your chest. A vast white plain stretches in every direction, broken only by the slow rise of glittering ice walls on the horizon. They are taller than mountains, moving so slowly you cannot see them shift, yet unstoppable. They crush forests, swallow rivers, and carve valleys that will last forever. Far above this cave, the earth itself is locked in its coldest age. We call it the last ice age now, but to them it had no name. To them, this was simply life. Imagine the oceans pulled back so far that whole continents appeared. Britain connected to Europe, Siberia touching Alaska, the islands of Indonesia rising as a single land. Imagine the Sahara green with rivers and grass while Europe lay under 2 miles of ice. This was not just winter. This was another planet. And yet, here they were, thriving. Inside the cave, every sound carries meaning. The hiss of fat on the fire, the rasp of stone against stone, the quiet crackle of burning wood. Every movement has purpose, every choice a matter of survival. The fire must never die. Embers are buried under ash each night to keep their breath alive until morning. Without it, they would waste precious time and energy, striking sparks from cold stone. Nothing is wasted. The mammoth's meat will dry on racks. Its fat will burn in lamps that glow through long, endless nights. Its bones will become tools, shelters, even walls. Its sinew will be thread, its hide, warmth. Death here is never without meaning. Beyond the cave, life walks on a thin line. Woolly rhinos wander the plains, their breath steaming in the air. Saber-toothed cats stalk the shadows. Even Neanderthals, once the masters of this cold, are disappearing from much of the land. Survival does not forgive mistakes. What kept us alive when so many others vanished? It wasn't strength. It wasn't speed or sharp teeth. It was something quieter, something deeper. It was memory. By the fire, the grandmother finishes her shadow play and begins a story. Her voice is soft, worn smooth by repetition. She speaks of rivers that freeze too quickly to cross, of plants that heal and plants that kill, of the first snow that signals the reindeer will move south. These stories are more than words. They are a map to life itself. The young woman stitching the coat carries the same wisdom in her hands. She knows which furs breathe best, which ones shed frost, which seams hold tightest against melting snow. She knows to line a hood with wolverine fur, because no other trim stays free of ice. Her grandmother taught her, and one day she will teach her own child. Even the hunter's blade is not simple. It is the shape of countless generations of thought. The angles of the flint, the glue made from heated resin, the binding sinew. These are solutions discovered long ago and carried forward in memory, skill, and practice. This is what saved us. Not strength, not luck, but imagination, shared across time. The firelight flickers softly against the cave walls. The girl yawns and curls into her mother's lap. Outside, the wind screams, but in here, there is warmth. There is safety. Tomorrow, they will step back into the frozen silence. They will hunt, stitch, carve, and teach as those before them did. And tomorrow, they will win again. The ice shaped them, tested them, pushed them to the edge. And yet, they endured. Through fire, through memory, through each other. They found a way to live in a world that seemed designed to erase them. And somewhere in the shadows of this frozen land, the story of humanity was being forged, one breath at a time, one stitch at a time, one shared fire at a time. But the world beyond this cave was changing. Soon the ice itself would turn against them, and survival would demand more than memory, more than fire, more than skill. It would demand everything. Lift your eyes from the small fire and picture the world beyond the cave. Not the hill outside, not the valley below, the whole earth. Imagine you are a bird drifting high above the clouds, the cold air gentle on your wings. Look down, and you will see a planet wearing a white crown. Great sheets of ice lie across the north like sleeping giants. They do not rush. They do not roar. They move the way mountains would move if mountains could walk, slow, steady, and sure. They press and scrape and grind. Valleys bend under them. Old rivers change their paths. Stones the size of houses slide for miles as the ice nudges them along, patient as time. Where you expect water, land waits. The seas have pulled back, as if the oceans have taken a deep breath and are holding it. Shorelines stretch far into places that are waves today. Islands reach toward each other and touch hands. A person can walk where later only boats will go. Paths open that no map today will show. A wide country of grass between Asia and America. A long plain between the island we now call Britain and the rest of Europe. People will travel these paths, carrying stories, beads, tools, and love from one world to another, and they will not know they are walking on borrowed land. Not every place is buried in ice. The world is a patchwork quilt. Fold one corner back and you find a green land with rivers and birds. Fold another and you meet a dry plain full of short, sweet grass that crunches underfoot. Some forests sleep under snow for months. Other places, far to the south, feel the warmth of long seasons. In some years, the big desert far away grows a skin of lakes and soft grass. In other years, it returns to sand. The planet tilts and sighs, and everything moves with it. On the far northern plain, winter is long and clear. The air is thin and dry. Snow falls, yes, but not as much as you might think. The wind scrapes it into pale waves and leaves wide, hard crusts that shine in the sun. Summer comes like a soft drumbeat that grows louder each day. In the high months, the sun forgets to set. Light hangs in the sky all night, a silver wash over the land. Little plants hurry to grow. Flowers open, insects hum, herds wake and move. This is the season of travel. Reindeer follow the wind, noses high, hooves clicking. Horses sweep across the flats in long brown lines. Bison walk with the slow power of moving hills. Along rivers, birds return by the thousands, laying eggs on gravel bars that glisten like wet shells. In the sea, seals and fish crowd into coves and channels. It looks like a feast spread across the whole earth. People learn this new planet the way a child learns a face, by watching. They watch the sky. It tells them what day is coming. A thin veil of cloud, a clear blue dome, a low band of haze that means cold. They watch the ice on the river. If it groans in a long, low note, the water is rising. If it pops and sings like glass, the cold is setting its teeth. They watch the wind dance on dry grass. They learn its tricks at the mouth of each valley, behind each hill. They read the land the way you read words on a page. Their eyes turn small movements into meaning. Stand where a great city will be one day and look around. Now, it is only ice, mile after mile, thick enough to swallow mountains. Walk east for a week, and the ice ends as if someone drew a line with a giant's finger. Beyond that line, the ground is open and hard. A hawk rides a pocket of warm air. Fox tracks cross the stream and disappear under a wind-blown ridge. In the far distance, a thin smoke line rises and fades. Fire, people. Other places surprise you. Caves open their mouths to the south, and inside their deep rooms you find color. Reds, blacks, soft yellows, spread across stone. Horses run along the curves of the ceiling. Bison fall. Deer turn their heads. A handprint blooms where someone pressed color against a palm and left a sign. I was here. I knew these animals. I walked this valley. I loved this world enough to leave a picture of it behind. Down on a coast where the tide breathes in and out through rocky teeth. The shore is wide and new. Kelp lies in wet loops. Shells make a pale band that crunches gently when stepped on. Here, people learn the sea's rhythm. Fish return with the seasons like clock hands. Seals rest on quiet shelves when the moon is right. Children watch mothers wade, hands quick and sure, lifting food from the water as if the ocean is a garden. Old men, faces wrinkled by cold and salt, teach where to set a net so a whole village will eat. Smoke from small fires drifts low, and it smells of brine and fat and wood. Far inland, where grass rolls to the horizon like a frozen wave, the earth is wide, and the light has a special clean look. Clouds are high and bright. The wind is a steady hand on your back or your cheek. In the distance, a long white band glows where the ice still grips the edge of the world. People travel here by signs no stranger would see. A broken twig that points like an arrow, the way snow heaps in the lee of a rock, the choice a herd made when it reached a fork in a river many seasons ago and never forgot. If you listen, the planet has a sound. In summer, it is a soft quilt of noises, water chuckling over stones, insects whispering, the low talk of animals, a far-off thunder when a cliff lets go and falls. In winter, the world becomes a bell. The great quiet holds all things. The cold is so deep you can hear small sounds travel a long way. The chirp of a tiny bird, the tick of ice cracking, the brush of a fox's fur against reeds. Footsteps drum on frozen ground like a hand on a tight skin. People make their own music. A bone flute sings by the fire. The notes are simple and bright, like stars. A drum made from skin and frame keeps a steady heart. A voice lifts and carries a story across the circle of listeners. Where the river bends, where the herd crossed last year, how to travel by the shape of the land when the sky is a white sheet and you cannot tell east from west. Song is a cord that ties memory to the body. A child hums the path long before she walks it. All across this patchwork world, small groups learn the shape of their own piece of it until they can walk it in dreams. They know the warm cliff where time grows and bees visit. They know the dry cave that keeps embers alive in a storm. They know the rock shelf where the river drops its fish when the spring flood becomes tired and lays down its heavy load. They know the smell of rain 2 valleys away and what that smell means here. Their map is not ink on skin or bark. Their map is breath and steps and stories told many times in the soft hours after eating, when sleep comes slowly and the fire is kind. The animals learn too. Wolves wear the moon on their fur and test the edges of the camp, curious but careful. Bears dig for roots where the sun warms the thaw. Cats with heavy teeth learn to circle wide around the smell of smoke. Herds find old paths buried under new snow. Life does not give up. It bends. Some places become safe pockets when the cold grows mean. A south-facing hill with a rock wall that drinks sun. A coast where currents keep the water gentle and the air kinder. A deep valley that takes the worst wind and smooths it into a breeze. People gather in these pockets. They stay for a season, sometimes longer. Children learn the taste of certain berries and the sound of certain birds in that one small spot, so well that the place feels like a person they know. When they leave, the place stays inside them. Years later, they can close their eyes and see the bend in the stream and the pattern the frost made on the stones that one very cold morning. The stars guide them when the ground gives no clue. In the long dark, the sky becomes a book. The bright river of the Milky Way pours over the north. Groups of stars rise and sink in a rhythm as sure as a drum. A story ties each shape to a path, a season, an animal. A boy who can follow the stars can walk home through a snowstorm when tracks vanish. A girl who knows the winter sky can tell her band how many sleeps until the light grows strong again. The wind is a teacher, too. It has flavors. It tastes of wet stone when weather comes. It tastes of iron when the deep cold settles in. It tastes a little of smoke when a forest far away is burning quietly under snow, a slow, secret fire that will wake in spring. Old women can tell what the wind ate 2 valleys over. Old men can tell if it is angry or only playful. Children learn to stand still, close their eyes, and listen until the air speaks. You might think such a world would break people. It does not. It makes them careful. It makes them kind. A single hunter cannot take on a winter alone. A family cannot carry a mammoth home without help. A child cannot learn the river by herself. So people do things together. They share food because tomorrow the luck will turn and the other family will bring the meat. They share warmth because one day someone will fall through the ice and the circle will need to be tight to bring him back. They share stories because stories are ladders, and someone will need a ladder to climb out of fear. Travel is not only for food. Sometimes people walk for days to stand where a wide river opens and herds must cross. Many bands gather there like birds at a lake. There is laughter and trading and song. There are new faces, new voices. Beads made from shells that once lay in a far-off sea change hands. Tools shaped in a style from a different valley pass from one palm to another. Young people look at each other with shy interest. Promises are made that will carry children from one band into another, and with the children, songs, tricks, cures, and maps spread like seeds on the wind. Far to the north, where the land meets nothing but more sky, people learn to live where even the trees do not bother to grow. They build smart houses that turn the wind aside. They turn fat into light. They make coats that laugh at the cold. They watch animals that travel with grace at the edge of the world and learn from them. A hood trimmed with the right fur will not ice over from breath. Boots sewn the right way will keep feet warm even when the ground is a stone of cold. Here, to be careless is to be lost. So hands become wise. So eyes become calm. The world is colder than any story we tell today, but it is not dead. It is awake. It is changing. Even the ice is always moving, always speaking in its own slow voice. The planet shifts as if turning in sleep, and with each turn, paths open and close. A land that was safe becomes a trap. A coast that was generous becomes a cliff. A valley that was quiet fills with new water and sings a different song. People who can listen, who can read, who can share, pass through these changes with fewer scars. People who cannot, well, the land is patient, and it takes back what it gives. If you could stand at the edge of a cliff and watch the years sweep by like clouds, you would see the white crown grow and shrink, tilt and breathe, as if the earth itself wore a living headdress. You would see roads rise and sink under the sea. You would see animals move like threads woven through a huge cloth, changing color with the seasons. You would see small flames, our fires, appear, vanish, and appear again, a chain of tiny suns stitched across the night. From far above, it looks fragile. Down here, beside a fire, with warm meat in your hand and your family's voices in your ear, it feels solid. It feels like a promise. We will wake tomorrow. We will walk the path we know. We will read the wind and the tracks and the light on the hills. We will be careful. We will be brave. We will be together. And yet, the sky is always writing new lines. A storm can redraw a valley in a day. A crack in an ice wall can turn into a river in a week. A long, slow warming can shift the herds to a place they were not expected. People who live by their eyes, ears, and hands feel these changes first. They do not panic. They adjust. They do what they have always done. Learn, share, and try again. When you close your eyes and breathe slowly, you can almost smell that air, the clean cold, the hint of smoke, the faint, warm sweetness of dried fat, the sharpness of snow. Your ears can almost catch the small sounds, a child's laugh, a bone flute's quick song, a fire's soft breath. Your skin can almost feel the fur at your throat, the smooth wood of a spear, the sting on your cheeks that means you are alive. This is the planet that froze and then taught us how to live anyway. It did not give lessons in words. It gave them in wind and light and time. We listened. We changed. We learned to walk farther, to watch closer, to hold each other tighter when the night grew long. We learned to make homes where no home should be possible. We learned to carry the sun in a bowl of stone and fat. We learned to wrap warmth around our children and tie it shut with thread made from the strength of animals. We learned to turn danger into shelter, bone into wall, ice into water, darkness into song. Tomorrow, we will step inside one of those homes. We will feel how the wind slides around it, how the heat stays, how the fire sits like a quiet heart at its center. We will see how hands and patience turned the cold's own gifts into a shield against the cold itself. For now, let the world be big and white and shining. Let the stars hang low and bright. Let the wind hum. The people have learned the shape of this frozen earth. And the frozen earth, in its slow, stern way, has learned the shape of them. The night is silent except for the wind. It moves through the frozen grass like a ghost, whispering to the earth. The stars above are sharp and bright, as if someone scattered diamonds across black glass. The air is so cold that each breath feels heavy, hanging like smoke before it fades away. But inside a small shelter, everything is different. Here, there is light. Here, there is warmth. A fire burns low at the center of the room. Its glow dances across the walls, painting them gold and red. Sparks rise, twist in the air, and disappear into the dark. Around it, a family gathers close, knees touching, shoulders leaning. The air smells of wood smoke, fat and damp fur drying slowly in the heat. The fire is not just warmth, it is life itself. For our ancestors, fire was magic. Imagine standing in the deep cold where the sun disappears for months and darkness presses in from all sides. Without fire, there is no food, no safety, no tomorrow. But with fire, the night bends to your will. It turns the cave into a home. It makes the ice retreat, even if only for a few feet. It brings color and comfort to a world otherwise locked in white and silence. Long before this night, long before memory, someone learned how to make fire. It was not chance, it was persistence. 2 stones struck until a spark was born. Dry grass gathered, breath held, hands cupped close until smoke curled upward like a promise. When flame came, it was tended like a newborn, fed, guarded, never left alone. Generations later, that care remains. Even now, a child wakes in the night and stirs the embers so the family will not wake to cold ash. Wood is precious in this frozen world. Trees are rare, slow to grow, and quick to vanish under hungry hands. So our ancestors learned to burn other things. At first, bones. The fat trapped inside them, baked by time and frost, burns hotter than wood and lasts longer. Cracked bones whisper softly in the fire, releasing light from an animal's ancient strength. Then came fat lamps. Picture a hollowed stone filled with melted seal fat or reindeer tallow. A strip of moss serves as a wick. Once lit, it glows steady and soft, burning for days without smoke. The light is gentle, almost alive, casting shadows that seem to breathe with the people watching them. These lamps turn darkness into day, letting families sew clothes, carve tools, and share stories even while the storms howled outside. The shelters themselves learned to hold heat. Some were caves shaped by nature, others huts built from mammoth bones and thick hides. Inside, the air stayed still and warm, while outside the wind could cut skin in seconds. Fires were placed carefully, stones arranged to trap and reflect heat. People slept close together, bodies lending warmth as much as flame did. In some places, hearths were shared among many families, a single fire at the heart of a small community. The heat would rise, touch the roof, and drift back down, holding everyone inside a quiet circle of safety. Around the fire, life unfolded. Tools were shaped, stories were told, songs were sung. Children learned to weave threads of sinew into clothes, while elders shared memories of hunts, migrations, and seasons long past. Fire gave more than warmth. It gave time. Without it, hands would freeze and work would stop. With it, nights became hours of learning and laughter, voices carrying softly through the glow. The firelight made shadows dance on the walls. Sometimes those shadows became stories themselves. Hunters chasing reindeer, mammoths falling, birds rising into the sky. Some caves still hold these pictures, drawn in ochre and charcoal, whispering tales across 30,000 years. But fire was also fragile. A storm could steal it. A careless hand could smother it. Bands carried embers wrapped in dry bark and moss, protecting them as they traveled, as if guarding a small, beating heart. To lose fire was to risk everything. To keep it alive was to survive. Even predators feared the glow. Wolves circled the edges but never came close. Saber-toothed cats watched from a distance, their eyes catching the flicker and vanishing into the dark. Fire gave humans something no other creature had: control over night. And yet, fire gave more than survival. It gave belonging. Gathered around a flame, people shared food, warmth, and dreams. They laughed. They grieved. They made plans for tomorrow and remembered those who were gone. Fire turned strangers into kin, bands into families. Close your eyes and listen. Hear the crackle of bone and wood. Hear the soft hum of a mother sewing a hood for her child. Hear the rise and fall of a story told in low tones, its words carrying the memory of paths through ice, rivers, and stars. Outside, the wind sharpens its claws. Inside, the fire answers with steady breath. This is where humanity became something more than surviving. Here, in the quiet glow of the hearth, we learned patience. We learned to share. We learned to plan beyond today. And as the storms passed and the ice deepened, the fire kept burning, a fragile thread connecting us to the promise of another dawn. The frozen night is long, but the fire never dies. The fire is low tonight. Its glow brushes gently across the cave walls, painting them in shades of gold and red. The wind outside screams, sharp and wild, but here in the heart of this shelter, a quiet hum of life carries on. A young woman sits cross-legged near the fire, holding a strip of soft reindeer hide in her lap. In her hands, a needle carved from bird bone gleams faintly in the light. The thread she works with is sinew, pulled from the inside of the very animal that gave its hide. It is strong, smooth, and nearly invisible. With patient hands, she stitches one tiny seam after another, drawing the edges so tightly together that not even the thinnest snowflake could slip through. This is not just work. It is survival. Without clothing, this land would have taken everything from us. The air is so cold that skin freezes in moments. Winds slice through open seams. Moisture, creeping inside boots, can turn to ice, stealing the feeling from toes until they no longer belong to the body. But every stitch, every choice of fur, every layer. It all stands between life and death. Once, long ago, someone shaped the first needle. It was no thicker than a twig, with a tiny hole drilled through one end, small enough for thread to pass, strong enough to pierce hide. That single idea changed everything. Before the needle, humans wrapped themselves in rough skins, loose and heavy, offering little warmth. With the needle came shape, fit, and protection. Coats closed tightly, boots hugged the feet, hoods turned against the wind. It was the first true armor against the cold. But our ancestors did more than make clothing. They understood fur like artists, choosing it with care and purpose. Reindeer hide, light but dense, trapped warm air inside each hollow strand. Wolverine fur, rare and prized, framed the edges of hoods, chosen not for beauty, but for magic. Frost never clung to it, even in the deepest cold. Around the wrists and ankles, squirrel pelts lined the edges, soft and flexible, sealing warmth where it mattered most. Layer by layer, the body became its own shelter. Against the skin, soft bird pelts turned inside out, feathers touching flesh, wicking away moisture. Over that came tunics made from reindeer or hair, sewn so perfectly that melting snow ran off like water on stone. On top, heavy cloaks of wolf or mammoth hide, windproof and strong. Every layer had its purpose, every seam was planned. In a world colder than any winter we know, these designs kept them alive. But clothing was more than protection. It carried identity. It carried love. Some garments bore tiny beads made from mammoth ivory, each carved by hand, each requiring hours of work. Shells from faraway coasts dangled from collars, traded across thousands of miles. A child's hood might be stitched with charms, a bone carved into the shape of a bird, a piece of amber tied to bring luck. These touches spoke silently of who someone was, where they came from, and the stories their people carried. Imagine a mother sewing a coat for her child. Every stitch is steady, careful, unhurried. Her hands ache, but she works without pause because she knows what the cold can do. When the coat is finished, she runs her fingers over the seams, testing for gaps, whispering a quiet promise that her child will stay warm. That promise is woven into the thread itself. Around the fire, the work never ends. Boots wear through, mittens tear, hides must be softened, stretched, and shaped anew. At night, children curl beneath thick sleeping robes sewn from bear fur, while adults repair the clothes that carried them through the day. Tools are simple: needles of bone, scrapers of stone, threads of sinew, but the results are perfection. Clothing so well made that even modern explorers envy it, and sometimes it was beautiful beyond need. At Songhir in Russia, archaeologists found a man buried beneath a coat decorated with thousands of tiny ivory beads. It would have taken over 2,500 hours to create. Months of patient work, a gift meant to last beyond life itself. To someone standing in that cave thousands of years ago, it wasn't just clothing. It was memory stitched into form, proof of care, proof of belonging. Each thread told a story. In these garments, you can almost feel the hands that made them. You can hear the quiet murmur of voices around the fire, smell the smoke on the hides, sense the shared warmth of bodies close together against the cold. Every layer speaks of thought and time, of knowledge passed from grandmother to granddaughter, from father to son. Nothing written, nothing carved, just skill remembered, repeated, perfected. Clothing held us together. It wrapped us not just in fur, but in memory, in love, in the promise of survival. It carried the work of generations forward in silence, protecting those yet to come. The young woman by the fire ties off her thread, biting the end clean with her teeth. She holds up the finished sleeve and smiles faintly, her breath a cloud in the cold air. Tomorrow this coat will keep someone she loves alive. The wind howls beyond the cave, but inside there is warmth, there is safety. And in the quiet glow of the fire, humanity learns the art of survival one stitch at a time. Because in this frozen world, every seam is a heartbeat, and every heartbeat matters. The first light of dawn stretches across the frozen steppe. The air is sharp, biting, and still. Far in the distance, a soft rumble rolls through the silence, deep, slow, and heavy. The hunters stop where they stand. Their breaths turn to silver clouds, floating away in the cold. Ahead, on the open plain, shadows move. A herd of mammoths, massive and quiet, grazes near a patch of frozen grass. Their woolly coats ripple in the wind. Steam rises from their bodies like mist from warm lakes. Each one weighs more than a truck. Their tusks curve like pale moons against the gray sky. To face them is to stand before living mountains. But to survive in this world, our ancestors had to try. These hunts were not reckless. They were slow, careful dances between life and death. Hunters spent days watching the herd, learning their movements. They waited for the right moment, the right path, the right animal. They knew which calves were too small, which bulls too strong, and which yearlings could be taken without angering the herd. No one moved alone. A single mistake could cost a life. Instead of running at the giants, humans used the land itself. They studied river crossings, narrow passes, and hidden valleys where the herd would pass. There, they prepared their weapons. The spears were simple, yet perfect. Fire-hardened shafts tipped with stone blades sharper than glass. Some hunters planted them deep in the frozen ground, angled just so, waiting for the charge. Others held lighter throwing, spears, launching them with atlatls, carved levers that made their arms stronger, their throws longer. With these, a hunter could send a point flying faster than a galloping horse. It was never chaos. It was patience. When the moment came, the herd thundered forward, snow exploding beneath their feet. The hunters' hearts pounded, but their hands were steady. A single wounded mammoth could feed a band for months. Its hide would become coats, boots, and shelter. Its bones, tools, and weapons. Even its tendons became thread for sewing. Nothing was wasted. And when the animal fell, there was silence, always silence. Around the great body, families gathered. The hunters placed their hands on its side, feeling the last heat leaving it. Some whispered words to honor the spirit of the beast. For them, these were not trophies. They were gifts. Life feeding life. Survival bound by respect. Imagine the smell of smoke as the fat sizzles over the fire. Picture the laughter of children as they watch the meat roasting. Hear the soft scraping of bone as tools are carved, the quiet hum of thread pulling hide into coats. These hunts were dangerous, yes, but they were also sacred. Each one tied the people closer to the land, to the animals, and to each other. Out on the steppe, the mammoths still roam, their shapes blur into the falling snow, their deep rumbles fading into the distance. For now, the hunters rest. But the bond between them and these giants lives on, in the tools we still use, the knowledge we still carry, and the gratitude we once held for every breath of life. Because in the Ice Age, survival was not about conquering nature. It was about walking beside it and listening. The wind moves slowly across the steppe, carrying whispers of a world long gone. Beneath the frozen sky, a hunter stands on high ground and looks out across an endless plain. Far ahead, the ocean should be there, but it isn't. Instead, land stretches as far as the eye can see. Rolling grasslands, shallow rivers glinting under the pale sun. Herds of mammoth, bison, and wild horses move like shadows across the white dusted earth. Birds scatter in waves, their wings catching the light. This is Beringia, a land that no longer exists. 20,000 years ago, the seas were locked away in mountains of ice. Water pulled from the oceans formed glaciers so tall they swallowed entire horizons. As the seas fell, hidden lands rose, vast bridges connecting worlds that today are divided by water. Where the Bering Strait now separates Siberia from Alaska, there was once no strait at all. In its place lay a continent-sized grassland, twice the size of Texas. It wasn't a narrow path of ice, but a wide, living country. Here, humans walked among musk oxen and giant bears. Rivers ran cold and clear, full of fish. Summers brought green pastures. Winters, long nights under an ocean of stars. Our ancestors did not rush across these lands. They stayed. They built homes, carved tools, and hunted mammoths beneath skies untouched by time. Generations lived and died on this bridge between worlds, waiting for the ice to open the paths farther south. But Beringia was not the only hidden world. Across the globe, other bridges appeared. Doggerland stretched between Britain and Europe, a fertile paradise where hunters stalked red deer and wild boar. Forests and rivers ran where the North Sea now lies. Families camped along its banks, listening to birdsong where today there is only water. Far to the east, the Sunda Shelf joined the islands of Southeast Asia into one vast landmass. People walked from Vietnam to Borneo without ever touching a boat. They fished from rich rivers, gathered fruits in dense forests, and hunted elephants no taller than a man. Each of these bridges became highways of life. They carried people, stories, and tools across continents. Shell beads from distant coasts have been found thousands of miles inland. Amber from the far north turned up in camps deep in the south. Ideas flowed as easily as footsteps, shaping the future of humankind. But these lands were more than pathways. They were homes. Beneath today's oceans lie rivers that once shimmered in sunlight, hills where children played, and hearths where families sang songs we will never hear. Entire worlds now sleep beneath the waves, their stories buried under silence. When the great melt came, the seas rose again. Slowly, patiently, they returned to reclaim what the ice had given. First, rivers widened, then lakes swallowed valleys. Finally, the ocean crept forward, wave by wave, until the bridges disappeared beneath its surface. Imagine standing there at the edge, watching the water climb higher each year. Paths you once walked vanish under cold tides. Campsites are abandoned. Families turn inland, carrying their memories with them. Today, ships cross the Bering Strait without knowing the footsteps beneath them. Fishermen cast their nets over Doggerland without hearing the echoes of voices that once called it home. The world we know rests on top of another world, one we cannot see, but one that carried us here. In every breath, we are tied to those who walked these hidden lands. Their journeys made ours possible. Their footprints, now lost beneath the sea, are still there, pressed into earth we will never touch. Sometimes, late at night, when the tide retreats and the waves pull back just a little farther, pieces of that old world return. A carved tool rises from the sand, a bone polished smooth by ancient hands, a fragment of a home. And in those moments, the ocean whispers the same truth it has carried for millennia. We come from lands that no longer exist, Entire countries, entire lives, entire worlds are gone. But the story they began continues in us. The bridges may have drowned, but they still connect us, silently, beneath the waves. The firelight trembles, throwing soft shadows against the cave wall. Outside, the wind drags icy claws across the frozen earth. But here, deep within stone, a quiet story unfolds. One of connection, patience, and the silent threads that bound distant worlds together. Long before roads carved through mountains or ships cut across oceans, long before cities lit the night sky, small bands of people stood at the edge of a vast, cold planet and began weaving something invisible, yet enduring. It was not written on stone, nor carved into monuments. It was carried instead in memory, in gifts, in whispers, the first great network of humankind. Imagine standing where Siberia meets the Arctic Ocean, thousands of years ago. Around you, endless white stretches toward the horizon, broken only by rivers frozen into glass. The air tastes sharp and dry. Yet here, in this seemingly empty land, traces of movement appear. Footprints layered upon footprints, worn paths leading north and south, east and west. Far beneath your feet, a trade is already in motion. A shard of black obsidian from a volcano thousands of miles away glints in the snow. Someone carried it here, passing it from hand to hand, camp to camp, long before you arrived. This piece of stone, smooth as ice and sharper than steel, is more than a tool. It is a promise, a connection between lives separated by entire worlds. At Juktov Island, archaeologists would one day find obsidian blades buried beneath frozen layers of time. By studying their edges, they discovered their origin, a lake in Russia, over 2,000 kilometers away. Think about that distance. 2,000 kilometers across tundra, frozen rivers, and ice-choked seas, without maps, roads, or beasts of burden. Yet somehow, these stones traveled farther than most of us will ever walk in a lifetime. How? Not by one journey, but by many. The obsidian passed from one band to another, like ripples spreading across still water. Camps became waypoints, people became messengers, and a path emerged where none had existed before. In this frozen age, distance was not measured by steps, but by trust. Dog sleds slid silently across the hard-packed snow, their breath rising like pale ghosts in the air. In each sled lay tools, beads, carved ivory, and precious blades of volcanic glass. These dogs were among humanity's earliest companions, not just hunters or guards, but lifelines pulling families and goods across unimaginable distances. Their paws etched highways into the ice, long before anyone spoke of nations or kingdoms. Each camp along the way carried its own story. Around one fire, a man carves a harpoon head from mammoth ivory, the spiral grooves perfect for holding sinew thread. Around another, a woman strings beads made from seashells found hundreds of miles away, her fingers moving with the steady rhythm of generations before her. These are not strangers to one another, though they may never meet face to face. They are bound by exchange, by an unspoken understanding that survival depends on connection. The gifts are small, but profound. A strand of beads from the farthest southern shores carries the scent of warm winds and salt water into the frozen north. In return, a spear tipped with obsidian flows back along the same invisible road, destined for hands that will never touch the snow. Through these gifts, people speak without words, telling each other, "We are not alone." And then there were the stories. Around the hearths of different lands, tales traveled alongside tools. The migration of the great herds, the rising of distant rivers, the secrets of plants that healed wounds or soothed pain. All of it passed mouth to mouth, night after night, until entire continents hummed with shared memory. One band might know the safe crossing of an icy river because another, hundreds of miles away, had once fallen through its depths. Another might hunt a strange fish only because someone far to the south had sung its name. This wasn't trade as we know it today. It was survival carried forward by generosity and trust. Each camp understood that what they gave would one day return, not directly, but through the wide circle of human need. A needle passed north might become a coat in the west. A bone carving gifted east might bring obsidian home again. But sometimes the exchange carried more than tools. It carried identity. Across the frozen lands, people wore beads, pendants, and charms, not only for beauty, but as quiet signals of belonging. A carved tooth from one valley might mark its wearer as kin to those who lived there, even if they had never met. Shell necklaces strung in a certain pattern told others which riverbanks your people followed. Through these silent symbols, strangers recognized each other as allies, potential friends rather than threats. In a world where the cold could kill in hours, knowing where safety lay was everything. Even as glaciers carved the land and rivers split into frozen braids, humans kept moving. Trade routes spread like threads from a central loom, connecting the far edges of continents. From the Siberian steppes to the Black Sea, from the rocky coasts of Spain to the hidden valleys of Central Asia, these paths stitched humanity together into something greater than the sum of its scattered bands. And yet, the beauty of this ancient network lies not only in its reach, but in its patience. There were no caravans rushing across tundras, no bustling markets echoing with noise. The network moved as slowly as people did, at the pace of footsteps and seasons. A tool carved in one generation might only reach the edge of its journey in the next. Knowledge passed from grandparents to grandchildren before completing its circle. It was the long breath of humanity, a quiet rhythm against the roar of the ice. Imagine sitting by the fire on a winter night, holding a carved pendant made from amber found hundreds of miles away. You do not know the person who shaped it. You do not know their face, their language, or the sound of their laughter. Yet, as you hold it, you feel their hands in yours. Across impossible distance, you are connected, bound by the simple act of giving and receiving. This was how we endured the frozen world, when storms buried valleys beneath white silence, when rivers froze so deep their voices vanished, when herds moved on and hunger gnawed. No band survived alone. It was this invisible web, stretched over ice and time, that carried hope from one horizon to the next. And when the great melt finally came, when the ice pulled back and the seas rose to swallow Beringia, Doggerland, and other hidden worlds, the network adapted. People followed new rivers, crossed mountains, and spread their stories farther still. The gifts kept moving. The trust remained. The roads beneath the ice became roads beneath the sun. Even now, we live on the echoes of those ancient connections. When a shell from the Mediterranean appears in a grave deep in Siberia, when a bead carved near the Arctic turns up thousands of miles away, we are reminded that our ancestors thought of each other, reached for each other, even when the earth tried to scatter them. Somewhere, buried beneath waves and forests and cities, those paths are still there, footprints pressed into vanished soils, hearthstones darkened by forgotten fires, broken beads once worn close to the heart. The ocean may hide them, the forests may swallow them, but the memory of them lingers in us, in our need to reach across distance, in our instinct to share stories. In the simple act of giving something precious to another, we are repeating what they began. The wind carries their whispers still across land and sea, a song older than words, older than writing, older than maps. It speaks of a time when the world was harsh, but humanity was bound together by something stronger than cold, stronger than hunger, stronger even than fear. It tells us we survived not because we stood alone, but because we walked together, one gift, one story, one promise at a time. And if you listen closely, in the hush of snow or the soft crash of waves, you might still hear them. The traders who never saw themselves as traders, the storytellers who passed their voices into the wind, the families who left footprints on lands now drowned. They are still there, beneath us, beneath everything. The roads they walked became the roots of who we are. And perhaps, in some quiet way, we are still walking them. The cave is silent, except for the soft hiss of wind weaving through its narrow mouth. Outside, the world is locked in a deep, endless freeze. The night stretches longer than memory, and the stars blaze cold and distant above the frozen land. Inside, though, there is light. A tiny flame dances, fragile yet defiant, casting ripples of gold against rough stone walls. Fire. It is more than warmth, more than survival. It is the heartbeat of humanity in the endless night. Without it, there is no tomorrow. Imagine a band of 30 people gathered close around a single hearth. Children curled in furs, cheeks flushed red from the cold. Elders leaning forward, their faces lit by soft orange glow, shadows shaping the lines of stories on their skin. Someone carefully feeds the flame, adding splinters of precious wood, twisting moss, and bits of fat scraped from the bones of last week's hunt. Every flicker matters, because wood is scarce here. The tundra stretches for hundreds of miles, bare and silent. Trees are few, stunted, and slow to grow. In a land where the temperature can fall below -50, burning through fuel too quickly means death. But our ancestors were never careless. They learned to create warmth from what others left behind: mammoth bones, dry dung, even animal fat pressed into hollowed stones to make lamps that burned steady for days. These weren't just fires. They were inventions, carefully designed for survival. A mammoth bone burns longer than any branch, releasing deep heat and no smoke. A stone lamp carved by hand turns a drop of fat into hours of golden light, keeping darkness at bay when the Arctic sun sleeps for months. Even now, scientists marvel at how precisely Ice Age humans understood fire. They controlled heat like chemists, treating flames as tools as much as warmth. But fire was more than a tool. It was a gathering place. At night, people came together around the flames, not only to keep warm, but to stay human. The crackle of burning bone, the scent of smoke woven with fat, the soft rhythm of breath. This was where knowledge lived. Here, under the stars no one could see, stories moved from voice to voice like sparks leaping from embers. One hunter teaches another where the reindeer cross the frozen river in late spring. An elder passes down the memory of a plant's hidden root that can soothe fever when no other medicine can be found. A mother hums a song to quiet a restless child, a melody carried from a different valley, passed through generations like an heirloom. Firelight made us more than survivors. It made us storytellers. Look closely, and you will see tiny soot stains on the ceilings of Ice Age caves, still there after tens of thousands of years. Each mark speaks of a torch lifted, a light carried into the dark. Some of those caves are miles deep, their walls painted with visions of animals, hunts, and mysteries we are still trying to understand. The artists didn't work in daylight. They worked by fire. flickering shadows gave their creatures motion, transforming stone into living stories. But the hearth was more than art, more than story. It was safety. In the Arctic night, predators stalked the edges of light. Wolves, cave lions, even bears larger than any alive today. To sit together, shoulder to shoulder, was to create a circle of life where cold and darkness could not intrude. Fire was trust, unspoken and absolute. Imagine the comfort it must have given. The wind screams outside, and frost sharpens on the edges of your lashes. But inside, your fingers rest against warm fur, your ears filled with the crackle of flames and the soft murmur of voices. The heat seeps into bone and breath alike, loosening the grip of fear. For children born in these caves, this was the center of the universe, a glowing heart that kept families alive through nights that felt eternal. And yet, it wasn't easy. Fire had to be made, protected, and carried. There were no matches, no sparks waiting in a box. Flame came from friction, from striking stone against stone, from coaxing heat out of brittle fungus and dry grass. A single mistake, letting the fire die, meant hours of labor, or worse, freezing death. So, they learned to keep embers alive. Bundles of smoldering moss and bark were wrapped carefully in hide and carried across miles, passing the sun from camp to camp. In a way, it was humanity's first form of continuity. One fire keeping many alive, one flame breathing through hundreds of hands. In some caves, archaeologists have discovered several hearths side by side, their shapes worn smooth by generations sitting close together. Around them lie tiny tools, beads, scraps of leather, and broken fragments of ivory needles. These weren't just temporary shelters, they were homes filled with memory. You can almost hear the laughter, the voices, the quiet sighs as someone dozes against the warm glow. Fire shaped the rhythm of life. By day, people walked under pale skies, following herds across the steppe. By night, they returned to the light, drawing close to warmth and song. And when food was scarce or storms howled without pause, it was around these fires that hope endured. But fire also gave humanity something unexpected: time. Before fire, darkness ruled the hours between sunset and dawn. Cold stole strength quickly, forcing people to sleep early, huddle deep, and wait for morning. But once we mastered light, nights became longer in a different way. People stayed awake, planned hunts, crafted tools, told stories, and dreamed. The world grew wider, not through distance, but through imagination. Around the flames, we became explorers of thought before we became explorers of land. And this gift of time, of light, of shared space transformed us. It bound us closer. It gave meaning to survival. Think of it now, thousands of years later, when you sit before a campfire or watch the warm glow of a candle in a darkened room. That same comfort, that same deep relief flows through you because it is written in your blood. Your ancestors once leaned into this same warmth, listened to these same whispers of crackling flame, and felt the same sense of home. Every flicker of light in the dark carries their memory. We survived the Ice Age because we learned to hold onto fire, not just the fire that burned in bone and fat, but the one we kindled inside ourselves. Against a planet of ice, we became our own warmth. Against endless night, we became each other's light. And in that glow, fragile yet enduring, humanity found its center. Because long after the storms quieted, long after the ice melted and the seas rose again, the memory of those fires stayed with us. In every story we tell, in every home we build, in every circle where people gather close against the cold, the embers still burn. We are not just children of the Ice Age. We are children of fire. The world outside was silent, buried beneath endless white. Wind carried blades of ice across the open steppe, carving drifts taller than a man. But inside the small shelter, there was warmth. Shadows from the fire danced along curved walls made of bone, fur, and hide, the first true homes of humankind. In this frozen world, shelter wasn't just comfort, it was survival. Without it, the cold would take a life in minutes. But our ancestors were not helpless against the Ice Age. They became builders, engineers, and artists, shaping spaces so perfectly designed that even the dead of winter could not break them. Imagine standing before one of these homes. At first, it looks like a mound rising from the snow, a simple curve of earth and bone. Step closer, though, and the details emerge. Giant mammoth skulls form the foundation, each one weighing as much as a modern car, perfectly interlocked like pieces of a puzzle. Long ivory tusks arch upward, forming supports strong enough to bear walls of stacked bones and layered hides. Over this frame, reindeer skins are stretched tight, their hollow hairs trapping heat as well as any modern insulation. Inside, it is quiet. The air is warmer than you expect, almost soft. Furs line the floors. Small storage pits dug into the frozen earth keep food fresh for months. Near the entrance, a fire glows low, its smoke escaping through a tiny vent crafted with care. Even in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in seconds, this home remains safe, dry, and warm. Scientists call these structures masterpieces of Ice Age architecture. At Mezherish in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered 4 mammoth bone houses built more than 15,000 years ago. Each one used the remains of dozens of mammoths, not fresh kills, but carefully scavenged from natural death sites miles away. Imagine the effort: collecting, transporting, and fitting over 40,000 pounds of bone without wheels, pulleys, or beasts of burden. This was more than shelter. It was community. Because no one built these homes alone. Bands of families worked together, shaping walls and roofs from memory passed down through generations. Each home was a map of inherited knowledge, a testament to planning, cooperation, and trust. And these weren't crude shelters thrown together in desperation. They were designed for life. Inside, spaces were divided into zones. Sleeping areas padded with soft furs, tool-making corners marked by scatterings of flint and ivory, storage pits arranged for easy access. In some sites, archaeologists even found evidence of decorated walls, carved bones, painted skulls, symbols etched into stone. Beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. To create warmth, they made spaces where the heart could rest as much as the body. But shelters alone weren't enough. To survive the Ice Age, humans had to wear the cold like a second skin. Look closer at the garments left behind, preserved in frozen earth and memory. They were marvels of design. Fur-lined leggings sewn from reindeer hides, soft as feathers and light as breath. Tunics layered with wolf pelts, their coarse guard hairs shedding ice before it could cling. Boots made from sealskin, supple and waterproof, with soles stitched separately for better grip on frozen ground. Around the face, hoods trimmed with wolverine fur, chosen not for decoration, but because it resists frost, staying dry even when breath freezes in the air. These were not simple hides thrown over shoulders. They were tailored clothing, engineered to keep warmth in and cold out, layer by layer. The secrets lay in the needle, a tiny sliver of bone, carved with infinite patience, drilled with an eye no larger than a raindrop. With it, sinew became thread, seams became airtight, and garments became tools as vital as spears and fire. At Sunghir in Russia, archaeologists discovered the burial of a man dressed in clothing adorned with 3,000 tiny ivory beads. Each bead took hours to carve and polish, and together they traced patterns so intricate they revealed the structure of the garments themselves. Layered, fitted, waterproof, clothes designed not just to endure the cold, but to master it. Modern Arctic explorers still use the same principles, layering moisture-wicking inners, insulating middles, and windproof outer shells. Our ancestors had no synthetics, yet they achieved perfection with stone tools and animal parts. Clothing wasn't just protection, it was identity. Imagine a child's parka sewn from 30 tiny squirrel pelts, each one chosen for the softness of its fur. The patterns match the garments worn by adults, scaled down to miniature precision. In a world where survival depended on warmth, to dress a child this carefully was an act of love and hope. Across camps and valleys, clothing styles differed in subtle ways. Beadwork patterns, choice of trim, arrangement of furs, silent signals of belonging, culture, and memory. Every stitch told a story. These homes, these garments, these tools, they were more than survival strategies. They were expressions of something deeper, the refusal to yield. Against a planet that seemed intent on erasing them, Ice Age humans shaped warmth out of bone and hide, carved safety from cold and silence. They didn't just endure the Ice Age, they made it livable. Close your eyes and picture this. A child falls asleep beneath a roof of mammoth bone, wrapped in reindeer fur soft against their skin. Outside, the snow whirls into endless night, but inside there is light, warmth, and the low murmur of voices. The scent of fat lamps drifts through the air, blending with the quiet crackle of fire. These walls, stitched together from memory and bone, hold more than heat. They hold stories, laughter, hope, the very heartbeat of humanity. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howls, its call carried by the wind across a frozen world. But here, inside, the cold cannot reach. This small circle of warmth stands like a beacon against the endless night, proof that we were never powerless. Even now, the earth remembers. Beneath layers of soil and time, these shelters still rest. Bones locked in silent rings, needles buried where they were dropped, beads waiting to be found, still strung with the echoes of hands long gone. Every discovery whispers the same truth. We survived because we learned to make warmth where there was none. We endured because we built homes where life could take root. We thrived because we turned survival into art. And when the ice finally began to retreat, when the world softened and rivers ran free again, we carried this knowledge with us. Into forests, across mountains, along new shores, the lessons of bone and fur followed. The shelters may be gone, the stitches have long dissolved, but the ingenuity remains, etched into us. Every house we build, every coat we wear, every fire we light carries the memory of those ancient hands. The cold tried to erase us. Instead, it taught us how to endure. And so, against a frozen sky, humanity stood unbroken, warm in body, fierce in spirit, carrying forward the quiet brilliance that once turned a hostile planet into a home. The wind roared across the endless white plain, pulling snow into spirals that vanished into the distance. In this vast frozen world, a single human life was fragile. Alone, one person had no chance. But together, small bands of people carved out safety where there was none, creating warmth not only from fire, but from one another. Picture a group of 25 souls moving slowly across the steppe beneath a sky heavy with ice. There are elders and children, hunters and gatherers, each one carrying something, food, tools, stories, memory. They move like a single organism, bound together by trust deeper than words. In a place where winter lasted most of the year, this bond wasn't a choice. It was survival. Food came and went like shadows. A lone hunter might succeed one day and fail the next. If everyone kept what they caught, most would starve. So they shared. Always. Every mammoth, every fish, every handful of berries was divided evenly among the band. Not out of kindness, but out of necessity. To keep one another alive was to keep yourself alive. Around firelight, this sharing became ritual. Imagine a winter night, darkness pressing in from all sides, the snow outside glowing faintly under a pale moon. Inside a mammoth bone shelter, the hunters return. Reindeer meat is placed in the center, and everyone waits, even the children, even the hungriest, until each piece is carefully portioned. No one eats until everyone eats. It was a quiet contract, older than words. Your life is bound to mine. This deep interdependence shaped everything. Leadership wasn't fixed. There were no kings or chiefs. The one who knew the river crossings led when rivers mattered. The one who understood furs best organized clothing when the cold bit hardest. When storms came, it was the elder with the memory of sheltering valleys who guided the group. Leadership flowed like water, changing shape as needs changed. And when conflicts came, as they always did, violence was rare. In a world where every hand was precious, anger couldn't be allowed to fracture the band. Instead, disagreements dissolved in subtle ways, through laughter, through teasing, through silence that let tempers cool. If nothing worked, a family might leave quietly, joining another group down the valley, returning when time softened wounds. Survival depended on peace. Even those who could no longer hunt or walk were never left behind. In caves across Europe and Asia, archaeologists have found skeletons of people who lived for decades with crushed limbs, damaged spines, missing arms, even blindness. Someone fed them. Someone carried them. Someone chose, again and again, to keep them alive. Why? Because knowledge lived in people. An elder remembered when the reindeer migrated early, or which plants soothed a fever, or where the ice thinned dangerously in spring. In a world without maps, libraries, or books, memory was the only archive. Keeping the old alive meant carrying the wisdom of hundreds of lifetimes. Even children were treasures, fiercely protected and raised by many hands, not just their parents. Anthropologists call it alloparenting, the entire group raising every child. Grandmothers taught sewing and plant lore. Uncles told stories of hunts and storms. Older siblings shared food and watched over the young. No one belonged to just one person. Everyone belonged to everyone. Around the fire, laughter was as vital as warmth. Songs rose into the dark, teaching the names of rivers, the calls of birds, the timing of seasons. Stories turned into maps for the mind, carrying lessons from those long gone. When one band met another during reindeer migrations, alliances were formed with gifts, shells from distant coasts, amber carried across mountains, feathers from birds hundreds of miles away. These weren't trinkets. They were threads tying scattered groups into a vast, unseen web of connection. Love wove through these ties too. Small bands were too fragile to marry within. To survive, they created networks stretching across valleys and rivers. A young woman might leave her home to join her partner's band, carrying stories and knowledge with her. A young man might walk for days to join a new family, bringing with him new songs, new tools, new ways of seeing the world. Every gift exchanged, every child born between bands, was more than personal. It was political. It was survival. Imagine one of these gatherings, hundreds of people from scattered camps meeting in a sheltered valley where the reindeer pass in spring. Fires light the slopes for miles. Smoke rises into the cold air, carrying scents of meat roasting on stone. Traders lay out piles of flint and shells, tools and furs, ivory beads and carved figurines. Children from different bands chase each other between shelters, while elders exchange old stories and new knowledge. Songs rise into the night as alliances are sealed, and lovers find one another beneath the stars. These meetings were more than celebrations. They were lifelines. When a band fell on hard times, when a river froze early, or herds failed to appear, these ties meant refuge, food, and safety. Alone, death came quickly. Together, survival stretched across generations. In a world where the cold killed without mercy, this was humanity's greatest invention, each other. Look around you now, and you can still feel it. Our hunger for belonging, for trust, for community, is older than memory. The warmth we seek in friends, in family, in shared spaces. It's the echo of fires long gone, of hands passing food in silence, of voices raised together against the wind. The Ice Age didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our hearts. We survived not by being the strongest, but by being the closest. Not by standing apart, but by standing together. Close your eyes and picture a frozen night. Somewhere, far back in time, a circle of light flickers against endless darkness. Inside, people lean close, their breath rising like ghosts, their voices low and steady. A child falls asleep on soft furs, head against a grandmother's lap. Outside, the wind howls across the ice, but within this small circle of warmth, there is safety, laughter, hope. This is where humanity learned to be human, and as the ice tightened its grip, as storms raged and predators circled in the dark, these bonds only deepened. Our ancestors became not just survivors, but caretakers, innovators, dreamers, building a world where no one stood alone. Because long before we tamed fire, forged tools, or crossed continents, we discovered something far greater, that the most powerful shelter in a frozen world wasn't made of mammoth bones or reindeer hides. It was each other. The cave is silent, except for the low hiss of burning fat lamps. Shadows dance on stone walls, glowing in shades of gold and red. A child leans against her mother, staring wide-eyed at the flickering shapes above her. She doesn't know it yet, but she is surrounded by the first storytellers, the ancestors who turned survival into something greater, meaning. Imagine walking into one of these caves 30,000 years ago. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of soot and earth. Your torch throws light forward, and suddenly the walls come alive. Horses run in perfect stride, bison twist mid-leap, woolly rhinos lower their horns as if ready to charge. You blink, but they don't move. These aren't real animals. They're paintings, drawn by hands long gone, using fire and pigment to hold memory in place. This wasn't decoration. It was instruction. Look closer. Each detail speaks. A herd of deer, antlers stripped of velvet, tells you autumn has come. A horse's shaggy coat means winter approaches. A pregnant mammoth shows when calves will be born, when food will be plentiful again. These images are maps, calendars, survival guides written in color and shape. Knowledge too important to risk forgetting had to be carved into stone, so it could outlive the people who carried it. Some caves hold symbols, lines, dots, spirals, repeated across thousands of miles. For years, archaeologists believed they were meaningless scratches. Then researchers discovered the patterns match the rhythms of seasons, migrations, and moon cycles. Across Europe, people who never met shared the same language of marks, passing information through symbols etched into stone. It was humanity's first network, a silent thread weaving distant groups into one shared memory. But art was more than instruction. It was emotion. Take the Chauvet Cave in France, where lions are painted in sweeping motion, muscles rippling beneath imagined fur. These weren't hunted animals. They were feared predators. To paint them was to understand them, to honor them, perhaps even to control them in the mind before facing them in life. Then there are the handprints, hundreds of them, pressed in red ochre against cold walls. Some are large, others so small they must have belonged to children. It's as if they are reaching across time, saying, "I was here, I lived, remember me." And we do. Art opened a door in the human mind, but so did sound. In the soft glow of firelight, deep inside these same caves, someone holds a hollow bird bone to their lips. Fingers cover tiny holes carved with delicate precision. The first note is hesitant, breathy. Then another follows, then another. Slowly, a melody emerges, curling into the dark like smoke. The sound echoes off the stone, becoming larger than one person, filling the space with something ancient and new at once. This was not random noise. The flutes, carved from swan wings and mammoth ivory, were tuned to scales that still sound harmonious today. Some had 5 notes, forming pentatonic scales, the same patterns found in lullabies and folk songs across cultures thousands of years apart. Music was born not as entertainment, but as connection. Imagine dozens of voices joining together in a dark cave, singing the same melody. Heartbeats fall into rhythm, breathing syncs, minds align. Music carries memory, soothing restless children, guiding hunters through song maps that describe rivers and mountains, teaching plants to gather and seasons to follow. Even before language was fully formed, sound bound people together. There are caves where paintings cluster in spots with perfect acoustics. Clap your hands, and the echoes answer back, turning walls into instruments. Were these places chosen because of the sound? Or did the sound become sacred because of the art? No one knows for sure. But stand there today, whisper into the darkness, and you'll hear it. The same hum, the same resonance that stirred something deep inside the first humans. Culture was being born in the coldest moment of human history. These weren't people merely struggling to eat and stay warm. They were dreaming. They were imagining. They were reaching beyond the immediate, thinking of ancestors, of spirits, of stories larger than their lives. Burials lined with beads and ochre show reverence for the dead. Figurines carved from ivory depict mothers and children, hunters and gods. In some places, archaeologists find tiny sculpted animals, perhaps talismans carried for luck. In others, strange hybrid figures, half human, half beast, speak of myths we'll never fully recover. What's striking is how widespread it was. From France to Siberia, the style, the colors, the symbols, even the tools used to make art, they connect across thousands of miles. People were trading not only shells and flint, but ideas. A new kind of inheritance had begun, not just genes, but culture. Around firelight, stories flowed. A child learned not just where to find food, but why the stars turn in the sky, why the mammoth returns each spring, why the spirits of ancestors guard the rivers. These weren't facts. They were meaning wrapped in memory, told so well they could never be forgotten. And while storms howled outside, while glaciers crept closer year by year, humans sat together, their voices rising softly in the dark, binding themselves to one another with song and story. Art and music became more than survival tools. They became proof of something new, that we weren't just reacting to the world anymore. We were shaping it, holding its patterns in our minds, passing what we learned forward, beyond a single lifetime, beyond a single band. Somewhere, a child placed a hand on a wall, pressing pigment against stone, leaving behind the shape of small fingers. 40,000 years later, that handprint remains. Through ice and fire, through everything time has erased, it still waits in silence. It's as if they're whispering to us. We were here. We dreamed. We sang. We remembered. And because of them, so do we. The night is quiet except for the low crackle of fire and the sound of wind slipping through the mammoth bone walls of a shelter. Outside, the world lies frozen beneath an endless white sky. Inside, 20 people sit close together, sharing warmth, sharing silence. Then, somewhere in the circle, a child laughs. Her grandmother touches her hair and begins to hum a song older than memory. But in this world, survival is not only about warmth or food, it's about connection. Imagine living in a band of just 25 or 30 people. Every face is known, every voice familiar, every heartbeat part of the same fragile rhythm. You wake each morning knowing these are the only people standing between you and the cold. But there is a problem. If you marry within this small circle, your bloodline thins and your children weaken. Left unchecked, your people vanish in a few generations. So long before there were cities or nations, long before kings and borders, humans invented something extraordinary. Love across distance, across hundreds of miles of icy plains. Scattered groups created invisible webs of alliance. Each spring, when the reindeer migrated, bands would converge on sacred valleys. Fires burned for days as people gathered, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, trading shells from distant seas, flint from far-off cliffs, and stories carried across mountains. And in the quiet edges of these gatherings, young eyes met. A glance, a smile, a gift of carved bone or shell. These were promises, to leave one home and join another, to bind two groups together not by territory, but by blood. Every marriage braided the survival of one band with another. If famine struck your valley, your children's kin in a distant land would take you in. If storms destroyed your shelter, you had a place to go. Love was not only personal, it was practical. It was a bridge across isolation. Picture a young woman walking for days across frozen rivers to reach the family of her new partner. Her footprints vanish in the wind, but she carries with her stories, songs, and skills, weaving knowledge between groups like threads in a vast, living net. Archaeologists find this truth buried in the bones. Beads carved from Mediterranean shells lie in graves hundreds of miles inland. Amber from the Baltic turns up near the Black Sea. The patterns of jewelry and ornament shift predictably along these ancient routes, proof of marriages linking distant worlds. And yet, beyond strategy, there was something more. Among the bones, the tools, the ornaments, there are hints of tenderness that time cannot erase. A burial of two teenagers, hands touching, surrounded by ivory beads carved with impossible care. A fox-tooth pendant rubbed smooth where someone's skin wore against it day after day, perhaps a gift carried close to the heart. A woman buried with ornaments from 3 different regions, suggesting she traveled, loved, and was loved by people far apart. When one group met another at these great gatherings, songs rose into the night, echoing against frozen cliffs. Drums carved from mammoth skulls carried rhythms through the dark. Stories of hunts, storms, births, and deaths crossed languages and landscapes, binding strangers into kin. These connections gave humanity its greatest strength. When the world warmed suddenly and rivers shifted, your kin far away told you where the herds had moved. When the ice tightened its grip and plants vanished from your valley, cousins across the mountains sent news of roots still growing there. These were survival networks built not by trade alone, but by trust, love, and memory. It's easy to imagine an ice age night beneath a sky blazing with unfamiliar stars. Hundreds of small fires flicker in the distance. A girl from one band walks between the shelters, holding a carved bead in her palm, the weight of choice heavy in her chest. Somewhere, another family waits for her, ready to welcome her as their own. Behind her, her mother watches, knowing she may never see her daughter again, and knowing too that this leaving carries hope, not loss. Because love was not an escape from survival. It was survival. Through these exchanges, humans became more than isolated clusters of wanderers. We became a species connected by invisible ties, carrying not only genes but ideas, tools, and dreams across continents. Innovations, like bone needles, woven nets, and painted symbols, spread along the same paths as lovers and families. What one band learned, all could inherit. This is why genetic studies today reveal something astonishing. Despite living in tiny groups, our ancestors avoided inbreeding almost entirely. The threads of connection were strong enough to hold the whole species together, even when glaciers divided the continents. Close your eyes and picture it. Hundreds of miles of frozen steppe. Yet somewhere in the dark, someone wears a bead carved by hands far away. Someone hums a song taught by a grandparent from another valley. Someone cradles a child whose blood carries two distant worlds. These alliances weren't marked on maps, but they were real. They were etched into memory, into the stories whispered around fires, into the beads worn close to the skin. They outlasted storms, migrations, even extinctions. When ice ruled the earth, love traveled further than rivers and wider than the steppe. It carried knowledge, safety, and hope. It tied lives together in ways no single person could see, yet every person depended on. Somewhere, deep in the past, a young couple sat beneath a pale sky, fingers intertwined as mammoths moved slowly in the distance. Around them, the world was cold, harsh, and vast. But between them, warmth bloomed. And because of moments like this, humanity endured. The ice would come and go. The herds would vanish. The rivers would change their paths. But the threads they wove, of love, of kinship, of memory, stretched unbroken through millennia, reaching all the way to you. You carry them still. The fire burns low, sending thin threads of smoke curling into the cold night air. Outside, the wind moans over the frozen steppe. But inside the shelter, 20 people sit close, sharing warmth, sharing silence. A child lies across her grandmother's lap, eyes half closed, listening to a voice that carries something more valuable than food, tools, or fire. It carries memory. In the Ice Age, survival wasn't only about strength. It wasn't just the quick, the young, or the fearless who ensured humanity's future. It was also about wisdom, the long memory of those who had lived through hunger, storms, and loss, who remembered where food could still be found when the land seemed barren, who knew which roots healed and which ones killed. The old women, the grandmothers, were libraries wrapped in skin and bone. Imagine life in a small band of 25 or 30 people. There are no books, no maps, no written records, Knowledge lives only in memory. A single mistake, digging up the wrong route, drinking from the wrong stream, could cost lives. Every lesson learned is stored in minds, passed carefully from lips to ears, over and over, across countless nights. That's why the elders mattered. Modern scientists call it the grandmother effect. Among hunter-gatherers even today, children with living grandmothers are twice as likely to survive. Studies of the Hadza people in Tanzania show that older women provide more food for their grandchildren than anyone else, sometimes even more than the children's own mothers, who are often busy nursing or caring for newborns. Now picture an Ice Age grandmother. Her knees ache, her hair thins, her teeth are worn down to nubs. She can't chase reindeer across the plains anymore, can't haul mammoth bones to the shelter. Yet without her, the entire band would falter. She knows where the roots grow in winter when snow hides the land. She remembers which valleys stay green during dry seasons. She can track the stars to find migration routes and predict when the herds will move again. She carries the landscape in her mind like a map drawn on memory. At Ohala II in Israel, archaeologists uncovered 23,000-year-old grinding stones coated with residues from over 140 species of plants. Someone knew them all. Which to gather, how to prepare them, when to roast, when to soak, when to dry. That knowledge wasn't discovered anew every generation. It was remembered, guarded, and passed down, often by those who had no more children of their own. This is why human beings are strange among animals. Most mammals don't live long past their reproductive years. Evolution rarely invests in bodies that no longer bear young. Yet humans, especially human women, live decades beyond fertility. Why? Because our species survived not just on muscle, but on memory. Grandmothers extended the reach of time itself. A mother can feed her child, but a grandmother can feed an entire band. She knows the old places, where a hidden stream still runs, where fish spawn when other rivers freeze, which tree's bark cures fever, which berries soothe an upset stomach. Her mind holds dozens of winters, dozens of migrations, dozens of storms survived, and stories remembered. And it wasn't only knowledge of food. It was the art of living together. In these small bands, conflict could be deadly. A single feud might split a group, leaving both halves too weak to survive alone. Grandmothers often became mediators, storytellers, keepers of peace. Around the fire, they retold the old tales, weaving lessons into memory, of a hunter who hoarded meat and starved, of a group that fought and was scattered, of ancestors who endured because they shared. Somewhere deep in an Ice Age cave, a child leans against her grandmother, hearing the story for the 100th time, not knowing that one day she will tell it too. Archaeologists find proof of this reverence everywhere. At Sunghir in Russia, a woman over 50 years old, ancient for the time, was buried 34,000 years ago beneath thousands of ivory beads. Her grave shows care, honor, and love. She wasn't forgotten. She was celebrated. Sometimes this respect extended beyond family. Genetic studies of Ice Age burials show that older women often raised and fed children who weren't even their biological kin. Adoption, foster care, shared motherhood. Humans learned early that survival wasn't about your children, but our children. This is what made us different from Neanderthals. In the famous Shanidar Cave, archaeologists found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man who lived for years despite severe injuries: a crushed skull, a missing arm, a badly healed leg. Someone fed him, protected him, and carried him when he couldn't walk. That kind of care kept individuals alive who would have otherwise perished. and in doing so, preserve their knowledge. Because knowledge was everything, when the Younger Dryas struck, that sudden, brutal return of glacial cold 12,900 years ago, the land changed almost overnight. Plants died, rivers froze, migration paths vanished. In some places, entire bands disappeared, but those with the deepest memories, those who could recall where to move, what to eat, how to adapt, endured, and often that memory sat cradled in an elder's mind. Picture a storm-swept winter. Snow hides the land, prey grows scarce, children cry from hunger. In the dim light of a fat lamp, an old woman speaks. There is a valley west of the river, she says, where the wind cuts the snow thin. The grass grows even when the herds vanish. My mother took me there when I was small. The next day, the band follows her memory and finds food. A single story saves them. The wisdom of the old became the lifeline of the young. And through this chain of knowledge, we built something remarkable: continuity. Children born into a world of cold and danger inherited lessons learned thousands of years earlier. They didn't need to discover everything anew. They stood on the shoulders of memory. Every gathering around a fire, every whispered tale, every song hummed to a restless child, carried forward the hard-earned victories of those who came before. Even today, echoes of this survival strategy live inside us. We crave stories. We listen to grandparents. We record our lives in books and songs, photographs and films. We are a species addicted to memory because memory saved us. Somewhere on the steppe, tens of thousands of years ago, a grandmother sat beside her fire, holding a small child in her arms. Her joints ached, her hands shook, but her voice was steady as she spoke the words she had been taught as a girl. Behind her, the wind howled, the ice crept closer, and predators stalked the night. Yet her words were stronger than hunger, stronger than fear. The child listened. The story lived, and so did we. The wind carries a strange silence across the frozen plains, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. The hunters rise before dawn, ready to follow the herds as they always have, as their parents and grandparents did before them. But this morning, something feels wrong. The grasslands where reindeer once gathered lie bare beneath the frost. The rivers they fished have turned to silent mirrors of ice, and above, the sky is different, colder, sharper, as though the sun has dimmed. 12,900 years ago, the world changed almost overnight. For thousands of years, the ice had begun to retreat. Glaciers melted, forests returned, and rivers carved new paths through ancient stone. Life blossomed where it had once struggled. People followed warmth northward, spreading into new lands with laughter, stories, and hope. Then, suddenly, the warmth died. In less than a decade, the planet plunged back into an age of ice, a brutal period scientists now call the Younger Dryas. Temperatures in Greenland dropped by 15 degrees Celsius in just 3 years. Imagine a world where your summer turns to deep winter before your child can learn to walk. Valleys once alive with green became deserts of snow and silence. Lakes froze solid and stayed frozen for over 1,000 years. To the people living through it, there was no science to explain this disaster, only the cold. At first, they must have waited for spring, but spring didn't come. Herds vanished as plants failed. The great mammoths migrated to unknown distances or fell where they stood, their massive shapes buried beneath new storms. Rivers they once relied on froze so deeply that water became a memory. Families watched as food stores dwindled and the smoke from distant fires stopped rising, bands disappearing one by one. Some gave up, others moved. From the Levant, modern-day Syria, Jordan, and Israel, comes one of the most remarkable stories of survival. There, people who had lived as hunter-gatherers for thousands of years faced a sudden truth. The wild plants they depended on were dying. And so, for the first time in human history, someone tried something desperate. They took the few surviving grains, wild rye, barley, wheat, and planted them. At a site called Abu Huraira, archaeologists uncovered evidence of this astonishing moment. Beneath the younger dryas layer, they found remains of hundreds of wild plants, varied diets, healthy teeth. Above that layer, everything changes. Fewer plant species, worn-down teeth from grinding seeds, stone tools designed for harvesting, crops. Agriculture was born not from abundance, but from crisis. Farming wasn't freedom, it was survival. The shift came with costs we still carry today. Archaeological evidence shows that the first farmers were shorter, weaker, and often malnourished compared to their ancestors. Skeletons reveal bent spines from endless labor, teeth riddled with cavities from grain-heavy diets, and lives often cut short by disease brought on by living close to others. But it worked. They endured. Across Europe and Asia, others adapted differently. In Eastern Europe, some followed the remaining herds of reindeer and bison across the frozen plains, becoming more nomadic than ever before. Along the coasts, people turned to the sea, learning to read the tides and pull fish from the icy depths. Farther north, where forests spread slowly beneath retreating glaciers, people began to hunt smaller animals, hares, birds, foxes, mastering traps and snares that required cunning more than strength. Each region rewrote its survival story. And yet, through all this change, one thing remained constant. Humans shared what they learned. Marriage networks tied distant groups together, carrying not only genes, but ideas. New tools, new foods, new strategies, all traveled along these ancient paths, like whispers on the wind. Knowledge spread faster than the ice. Still, some groups didn't make it. The Clovis culture of North America, once masters of hunting mammoths with their razor-edged stone points, vanished almost entirely from the archaeological record during this period. In layers above their tools, there is silence. Their disappearance remains one of prehistory's great mysteries, a reminder of how fragile survival was, even for the most skilled. But others thrived. In Japan, people perfected the art of pottery, some of the world's oldest, designed not for beauty, but for survival. These clay vessels allowed food storage in a time when scarcity ruled, keeping grains and dried fish safe from rot and predators. In northern China, early settlers experimented with millet cultivation. In South America, ancestors of the Andean peoples began domesticating potatoes long before the ice had fully released its grip on the mountains. Each of these small sparks carried forward into the future, reshaping humanity itself. And yet, imagine the toll on the spirit. For generations, families had followed the same rivers, hunted the same herds, gathered the same roots. The land their grandparents had walked became unrecognizable. Entire ways of life vanished like breath in cold air. Elders told stories around the fire, but each year, fewer of those stories matched the world outside. Somewhere on a frozen night, a grandmother leans close to her grandchildren and whispers, "Once, this valley was green." The children look at the endless snow and struggle to believe her. This was more than climate change. It was a transformation of identity. The younger Dryas lasted 1,300 years, longer than the time between the fall of Rome and today. Entire cultures were born, flourished, and died within its span. By the time warmth returned, the humans who emerged were no longer the same as the ones who entered. They had become gardeners, sailors, builders, and traders. They had learned to shape the land, not simply follow it. They had begun creating food rather than waiting for it. And yet, in their hearts, they still carried the memory of what came before, the knowledge passed down by elders, the songs of the hunt, the stories of mammoths and herds under open skies. In some places, they carved those memories into stone. In others, they kept them alive in painted caves, music, and beads worn close to the skin. Even as they adapted, they remembered who they had been. And perhaps that is why we survived when so many species did not. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, all vanished. But humans endured, not because we were strongest, but because we could change. The ice took nearly everything, but in taking, it forced us to become something new. Now, thousands of generations later, you carry their legacy in your blood. Every meal you eat, every home you build, every seed planted in the ground, it all began in those years when the cold came back and refused to leave. Somewhere beneath layers of ice and earth, the footprints of our ancestors still lie frozen. If you could follow them, they would lead you through a world of vanished rivers, across dry seabeds now drowned beneath waves, into valleys where fires once burned bright against the darkness. They would lead you to the edge of endurance, and then beyond it. Because that's where humanity was reborn. The world nearly broke us, but we refused to break. The sun rises over a world that no longer feels familiar. For tens of thousands of years, ice ruled the earth. It carved valleys, crushed mountains, and locked oceans away in frozen prisons. But now, the ice is dying. 15,000 years ago, the great melt began. At first, it was slow, so slow our ancestors barely noticed. Rivers ran a little stronger in spring. Streams that once froze solid trickled with new life. Patches of green returned where only pale frost had lingered. People watched the land change but did not yet understand what was coming. And then, the melt accelerated. Across the northern hemisphere, glaciers that had towered miles into the sky began to collapse. Entire ice walls cracked like thunder, sending shards of frozen mountains crashing into valleys below. Rivers swelled and raged, tearing through the land in roaring floods. Lakes that had slept beneath the ice for millennia burst free, drowning plains and forests alike. Sea levels rose so fast that within a single lifetime, familiar coastlines vanished beneath the waves. Where families once hunted and gathered, the ocean now stretched endlessly. Entire continents were reborn. Imagine a map of the world at this time. Britain wasn't an island. It was part of Europe, connected by rolling grasslands where herds of wild horses roamed. Japan touched Korea. Siberia and Alaska were bound together by a vast land called Beringia, a grass-covered country twice the size of Texas. People lived there for thousands of years, building homes, hunting mammoth, fishing rivers that no longer exist. Today, that entire land lies hidden beneath the sea. The melting reshaped not just the earth, but the way humans lived. For generations, our ancestors had followed reindeer herds across open plains, hunting mammoth beneath endless skies. But as forests spread and wetlands bloomed, the world they knew disappeared. The great herds dwindled, and new animals filled the void. Deer, wild boar, elk. Hunters traded throwing spears for bows, learned to stalk quietly between trees instead of chasing prey across grasslands. And in some places, people stopped wandering altogether. When the land began to shift beneath their feet, humans built stronger shelters, more permanent homes. Fishing became vital where seas crept inland, flooding old hunting grounds. In other places, farming spread as wild grains and tubers grew more plentiful in warmer soil. Entire cultures formed around this new stability, anchored to place rather than following herds. But for many, the changing world was terrifying. Stories began to rise, whispers of the old lands swallowed by water. In every corner of the globe, ancient myths carry fragments of memory, tales of floods sent by angry gods, legends of islands that sank beneath the sea. From Australia to the Americas, from India to Scandinavia, humans kept the memory of rising waters alive through story, carrying warnings across generations. Perhaps those myths are echoes of places like Doggerland, the vast plain that once connected Britain to Europe. Archaeologists have dredged up tools, bones, and artifacts from the seabed, evidence of a world where people once lived, now lost to the tides. For the families who watched their homes vanish beneath the ocean, it must have felt like the earth itself was betraying them. And yet, humanity endured. We adapted, as we always had. The land changed, and so did we. Trade routes opened along the new coastlines. Canoes and rafts turned rivers into highways. Communities grew around fertile deltas where once there had been frozen tundra. We learned to live with rising seas and shifting shores. But the transformation carried a cost. Entire cultures disappeared with the lands they called home. Languages were lost, memories buried beneath silt and salt. The wild abundance of the Ice Age faded, taking with it the mammoth, the woolly rhino, the cave lion, the giant deer. The earth grew quieter as species after species vanished, leaving us as stewards of a world we had not yet learned to understand. And still, we pressed forward, from the valleys of the Fertile Crescent to the coasts of South America, from the forests of Europe to the islands of the Pacific. Humans took the gifts and the scars of the melting world and built something entirely new. Villages became towns, towns became cities, rivers carried boats heavy with grain and stories. Trade wove distant peoples together like threads in a tapestry. The Ice Age was ending, but its shadow lingered in us. It shaped the way we build, the way we fear, the way we dream. Deep in our myths lie the ghosts of drowned lands and lost herds. In our bones lives the memory of endless winters and roaring floods. The survival strategies our ancestors forged, cooperation, creativity, resilience, became part of us forever. And today, as the ice melts again, as seas rise and storms grow fierce, we are not experiencing something new. We are reliving an ancient story. The earth changes. We adapt. We endure. Somewhere beneath the waves, in the silence where Doggerland once was, lies the evidence of how far we have come and how fragile we still are. Our ancestors survived fire and flood, ice and famine, by leaning on each other, by remembering, by imagining a future even when the world around them collapsed. You are here because they refused to give up. Their story is your story, and the ending is still being written.